It began with a whisper, a name echoing through the decades, Susie Brown. She was a young girl full of life, known for her infectious laughter and bright smile. Then one day, she vanished, gone without a trace. The only clue was her last known whereabouts, Wicker Road. Wicker Road was no ordinary path. It was a shortcut through the woods, shrouded in shadows and whispers of forgotten things. The townsfolk always warned their children to stay away, but Susie, in her youthful curiosity, disregarded their warnings. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Susie Brown yielded nothing. The disappearance of Susie Brown became intrinsically linked with Wicker Road and the entity that supposedly resided there. High atop a hill overlooking Wicker Road stood an ancient, dilapidated house. Its once bright paint had long since faded to a dull gray, the wooden siding rotting and warped with age. The windows, most of them broken, resembled vacant eyes, staring out at the world with a chilling emptiness. Torn, tattered curtains like decaying shrouds fluttered in the wind, hinting at the secrets hidden within. The old house had always been a source of unease for the townspeople. Even in broad daylight, an unnatural chill seemed to emanate from its very core. But after Susie Brown's disappearance, the old house took on a new, more sinister significance. The townsfolk, fueled by fear and grief, began to whisper about its sole occupant, a reclusive man named Richard Hines. They called him a hermit, a loner, an outcast. Richard Hines became their scapegoat, the embodiment of their collective terror. The accusations started subtly, whispers in the wind, veiled threats cast in hushed tones. But fear, much like a wildfire, quickly spread through the town, consuming all reason and logic. Richard Hines, the recluse who kept to himself, became the target of their paranoia. They called him the Oogly Man, a moniker born of fear and superstition. One night, a mob of townspeople, their faces contorted with rage and fear, descended upon the old house on the hill. Armed with pitchforks, axes, and torches, they stormed the decrepit structure, fueled by a blind thirst for vengeance. Richard Hines, caught off guard, never stood a chance. They dragged him from his home, the supposed monster in their midst, and beat him mercilessly. His pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears, his cries for mercy drowned out by the mob's fury. Richard Hines, the man they had demonized as the Oogly Man, died that night, another victim claimed by the shadows of Wicker Road. The truth of Richard Hines's innocence, his only crime being his isolation, was quickly swept under the rug. Jaeger Village, once shrouded in the shadow of tragedy, had seemingly moved on. The horrors of the past faded into whispers, a dark folktale whispered by the older generation. Wicker Road, once avoided at all costs, was now just another path, the old house on the hill left to crumble in peace. But some wounds, no matter how deeply buried, refused to stay hidden. 17 years after the death of Richard Hines, a new wave of terror swept through Jaeger Village. It began with the high school students, their youthful exuberance a stark contrast to the growing fear that gripped the town. One by one they started dying, their deaths as gruesome as they were inexplicable. Mark Turner, the star athlete, was found impaled on the rusty spikes of the old cemetery fence. Then came Sarah Miller, the prom queen, her once radiant beauty marred by the horror etched on her lifeless face. As the body count rose, so too did the fear. The legend of the Oogly Man, once thought buried, resurfaced with a vengeance. The deaths continued, each one more horrifying than the last. The once peaceful town of Jaeger Village became consumed by fear, its inhabitants too terrified to venture out after dark. The authorities, baffled by the lack of evidence and the sheer brutality of the murders, were at a loss. The only connection they could find was the victims, all high school students, all connected, however tangentially, to the families who had participated in the killing of Richard Hines. The revelation sent a shiver down the spines of the townsfolk. Was this retribution? Were they being punished for the sins of their past? The haunting possibility was too much for some to bear. Families packed up and fled, leaving behind their homes and their history. desperate to escape the wrath of the Oogly Man. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The specter of Richard Hines, or whatever malevolent force was at work, had a firm grip on Jaeger Village, its tendrils of fear reaching into every corner, every home. The town held its breath, bracing for the next cruel twist of fate. The townsfolk, gripped by fear and superstition, turned to desperate measures. They sought solace in ancient rituals, performed under the pale light of the moon. They hung protective charms above their doors, whispered prayers to forgotten deities. They pleaded with the spirit of Richard Hines for mercy, their pleas echoing through the empty streets. But the killings continued. Whispers of a curse, passed down through generations, began to circulate. Some whispered of a blood sacrifice, a desperate attempt to appease the vengeful spirit. Others spoke of abandoning the town altogether, leaving it to its fate. However, amidst the chaos and fear, a small group of individuals refused to surrender to the darkness. They delved into the history of Jaeger Village, searching for answers in the annals of its past. The investigation led them to a dusty old book hidden away in the attic of the town library. It was Richard Hines's diary, filled with his thoughts, his fears, and his dreams. In its pages they discovered a man tormented by loneliness, ostracized by the townsfolk, wrongly accused of a crime he did not commit. There was no mention of dark magic, no confession of evil deeds, only the heartfelt words of a man yearning for connection. The diary ended abruptly on the day of his death, the final entry filled with a chilling premonition of the impending doom. He wrote of shadows gathering, of whispers in the wind, of a darkness descending upon Jaeger Village. He wrote of an evil that predated his arrival, an ancient malevolence that fed on fear and despair. The truth, it seemed, was far more terrifying than the legend. The Oogly Man was not the ghost of Richard Hines seeking revenge. It was something older, something darker, something that had haunted Jaeger Village long before Susie Brown vanished on Wicker Road. And it had found the perfect vessel for its terror in the fear and guilt that plagued the town. To be continued. Thank you all so much for watching part 1 of this macabre tale from Father Locke's Horror House's 7-Minute Mayhem Horror series. Welcome to the family, all new subscribers. We see ya, and it's such an honor to call you a Locke. Please subscribe and hit your notification bell if you haven't already. Be safe out there. And in the words of Father Locke, always remember and always know that he loved y'all. Bye, family. And thank you for being a great member of it.